So in this project, we're going to be making our own version of MineCraft blocks. And we're going to make them look pretty decent looking and have some nice bevels on them, things like that. We're going to take the results from Maya and then we're going to push that into Unreal Engine 4, and then you'll be able to start laying these things out and building your own little space using some of the blocks that you created. So let's go ahead and get started. So here we are inside of Maya, and just so you know, let's turn on the grid. And you can actually change this background color. I wanted to show you that real quick. So if you hit Alt B, you can cycle between these different colors. So I'm going to keep it on this gradient kind of color here. I also turned on the grid. Let's go ahead and make sure that our grid is set up correctly. So if we go under Display, Grid, and go to the option box. And let me pull this over here so we can see the options for this thing. Again, I have this length and width set to 360, and that pushes it out this far into the world. Grid lines every 10 units, and then I'm going to have a subdivision of 10, and these are the colors I'm using and the options. If you hit apply for that, you should have a grid that looks very similar to what mine looks like. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and make our cube. We're going to go to create polygon primitives, and we're going to do a cube option box right here like that. And we're going to leave the width, height, and depth. We'll set that to 10 by 10 by 10, and that'll give us 10 Unreal units, which are centimeters. We'll have the axis set to Y. Go ahead and hit apply like that. And then the next thing we're going to do is open up our UV texture window. So we can go under Windows, UV editor right here like that. And let me pull this onto the screen so you can see it. And you can see whenever we make a cube, these are the default UVs that you have. I'm going to zoom out a little bit like this. And so these are the UVs. I just want you to kind of pay attention to what's going to happen whenever we do some beveling on this. So if we hit F10 to select our edges, or you can right click over this and say edge right here and drag a marquee over everything, you'll select all the edges like that. If you shift right click, you can go to this bevel edge, and we could go the option box for it. We'll just go ahead and do the bevel edge, and we'll do the interactive beveling here. So this fraction here will give the distance that we're going to do for the bevel, and let's try something like 0.05, something like that. I think that'll work pretty good. Now again, let's take a look at what's going on with these UVs. If we go in here into the window, if yours doesn't look quite like mine is, I've got all the options kind of open for this, so you can see these little kind of slices here. If you click on them, they'll open, they'll expand or contract depending on if you pick on it. And we've got some options here for seeing the texture borders. Let's go ahead and turn that on, and you can see this is where it's actually splitting the model, at least in the UV space, so we can lay it out flat. And let's just kind of pay attention to that. So we've only got one segment on here. If we do something like 2 segments, you can see what we're going to get at that point. And that's looking pretty decent. Let me try if I do 3. We'll do that. And what I'm looking for is a number that's going to give us nice kind of rounding, but then it's going to have a split going right down the middle of all these. So if you saw, if I did a split here of 2 for 2 segments, we've got that going on here with this one, but it's a little low res. If we do 3, we don't have something running down the middle of each one of these squares here. So I'm going to set that up to 4. And now you can see I've got nice rounding, and I've got a center line that's going to go down each one of these pieces here like that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's just go ahead and we'll click off of that. And then now to split these things off, I can just double click on an edge, and you can see it will finish out that edge loop that we've got. So it's going to select all these. If you need to select additional edges, you can hold down Shift and add to it. If you hold down Control, you can take away from a selection. If you hold down Shift and drag a marquee, you can add selections that way. Hold down Control and do a marquee, and you can subtract selections that way. So I'm going to hold down Shift and double tap on that line to get this here. Shift, double tap this here, and hold down Shift and double tap this. And then what I'm going to do is, you can see we've got these edges selected here in the UV window. We're going to use this button right here, which you can see when I click on this or hover my cursor over that, you can see down here in this area, it's going to give you tooltips. So this is telling us this is going to separate the UVs. So this is cut UVs, and then this one's join UVs if you needed to join them. So I need to go through and I need to look and I want to separate out each one of these faces. So it looks like I need to split that. And again, why this button here for the texture borders, this comes in handy so you can see pretty easily with these thicker lines which edges are sewn and which ones are cut. And we're going to cut all these off. Let's take a look around. I think we're pretty good at that point. And I'm just going to orient the model this way like this. Now if we did this correctly, we should be able to use this tool right here. We should be able to select this. We can right click over our model and say UV, and if we select this, we should get this option to kind of move things around kind of at will. So I'm going to say I need to find which one I'm selecting. So that's the back of the model. You can see that there. I'm just going to push this off to the side, and then this was what we consider the bottom of the model. So I'm going to zoom out, and while we're laying this stuff out, we can push this stuff down anywhere we want, kind of thing. And it looks like basically the way that this is kind of laid out, yeah, this is going to be the front. So let's put the front like here. We'll put the left side, and then this was the back like that. Then we can put this somewhere here like this, and again that's the side here, and then this would be the bottom of, no, this is the back. So this is the back, and if this becomes a little confusing, I'm going to right click on here and say faces, and I can select faces. I need to take it off this tool. This tool always trips me up. Whenever it's on there, it does some weird behavior. So if I want to get out of this tool, I just tap Q, and that puts us on our pointer tool. And then now I can select face, and then I can select faces at that point. And it should be easy for us to tell what we're selecting. So there's our front. Here's our left. This should be the back. And this is the top. So let me move that up there. Let me get the face here for this. So this is right. And our bottom is down here. Okay. So this is top and then bottom. I'm going to right click on there and say UV, and I can just select this here, kind of move that. And you can see that this is what is considered the 0 to 1 space for your textures. And basically, if you put a texture on here, any of the UVs, they're going to get mapped to this 0 to 1 space. Now the grid does continue out past this. This is -1 and -1 here. So this is the live area. This is the area that you really kind of care about for what is going to be going on with your textures. So I'm just going to select my UVs, and we've got them all kind of laid out, at least in a way that makes a little bit of sense. The reason my grid kind of looks this way is because what I'm going to do, I'm going to have you guys create a texture, and you're basically going to take this section and you're going to map it for each one of these squares here. So that's why I've got my grid kind of divided into threes here. So if we go under view and then go to grid right here, you can see here are the options that I set up for making the grid kind of look like this. So grid lines every 1 unit, and then I gave a subdivision of 3, because if we put that here at 2, then it's going to kind of split down the middle, and I wanted that split in a way where there's setting up 3 quadrants here. Now we're going to have some wasted space down here, but that's okay. It's kind of difficult when you've got something like a cube and it's got these 6 different sides to it. So we're going to have a little bit of wasted space here, but our textures are going to be actually really, really small, so it's not a big deal. So I'm going to select all those UVs. I'm going to put it on the scale tool right here, or you can tap R. That's the hotkey for it, and you can click and drag in the middle here. Make sure not to drag these because that will non-uniformly scale. We can click and drag this one here like that, and I'll put it on the move tool. So I'm hopping back and forth between scale and translation. So you can put your hands on the hotkey W and R and you can just flip back and forth between those two. And I'll keep scaling up. And the goal is to get these really close to being about the right size here for this. So what I'm going to do is, I got it on the move tool. If I zoom into this location here, like this, even though we can't see our move manipulator, if we're on move, we can hold down shift and middle mouse drag, and we can move either left or right. So again, I'm holding down shift because what I'm trying to do is get this really close to the corner like that, and then I'll zoom out because I'm going to show you it is possible for us to take our pivot point. So if we tap D, we can temporarily turn on or off moving a pivot point, and if we take it off here, tap D, and we click on this, we can move this right up here into the corner like that. Tap D again and we'll put it on R for scale. Sorry about that. Actually, you can set it per thing you're doing. So the scale, if I tap D, we can set the pivot point for scale. So those can be different. Forgot about that. So we'll just move it. Not a big deal. And I'll tap D again. And then now whenever I scale, you can see it's going to scale from this pivot point right in here. And sometimes it's just really kind of very finicky about scaling some of this stuff. So I wish it wasn't popping like that. So I'm just trying to get it roughed in like this. So I'll select this and I'll move it. Looks like it got rotated a little bit. So tap E for rotate, or you can come on over here and select it. But it'd be best if you start learning these hotkeys. So just keep your hands rest, or your fingers rested on W, E, R, and then you can kind of move these things around like this. I'm going to take this one and push it right up in here. Take this one and push it. And what I could do is this. So basically I've got these selected here, and if I want to select all they're considered shells, so I want to select all the UVs on there, I can, oops, no, not that. I can right click on this and say shell, and let's go undo. Let me go back to my UVs. I'm going to select shell, and for some reason it's doing this whole thing here, which is fine. It just seems kind of weird that it's going into like something that looks like a face mode. So when I've got it kind of here, there are some tools in here for moving UVs. So let me expand this window out even more. And you can see over here, if I move this down 0.25, you can see it's going to move it down grid increments of 0.25. And I could push them numerically down like this. What I'm trying to do is get these out of the way so I can kind of work on just this one here. If I go to UV, now I can zoom on this. I'm going to hold down Control and Alt and drag a marquee around there. That'll zoom based off of your selection. I can kind of zoom out like this a little bit. And now if I right click and say UVs, I can select these here like this, put on the move tool, hold down X to temporarily turn on grid snapping, and then I'll snap to the grid here like this. And so I'm going to move these down just a little bit. And it'd be best if you can get these kind of as perfect as you possibly can. If I hold down X and snap to the grid here like this. This is kind of what you want to do. I know it's a little tedious, but it'll kind of pay off in the end whenever we put our textures on here. You can see there won't be any kind of gaps at all at our edges. So I'm just going to do one of these, and I'm going to let you do the rest of them just like what I do, and I'll stop the video, and because basically this process is not going to change. I'm just selecting these, holding down X, and I can move in this axis or this axis, and I only want these to kind of snap to there. So I'm going to snap those up. So now you can see those are nice and even on the grid. Now if I select this, remember we were talking about moving these in this grid space. We've got 1, 2, 3, right? And so if we take the number 1 and divide it into 3, we're going to something like 0.3333, something like that. So you can see I can easily manipulate this and move those across the grid spaces now. So what would probably be easiest for you would be to snap one of these somewhere on the grid that's away from everything else, and then numerically move it into place. So you can select some UVs like this. Again, right click, UV, I'm going to select this. If I hold down shift and do, it's basically the comma key or the period key, which I'm going to use the period key. That'll grow a selection, and it'll only do it based off of the shell. So that comes in handy. So you can see I'm kind of, I missed it. So I had hold down shift and do that, that key again, the period key, until I get everything there. So I missed a few. I'm going to push this up and over like this, and then this will be the last one that I'll do with you, because, you know, again, I just want to show you that we can get this thing kind of snapped up. And I'm not going to snap it to the grid just because that takes a little while. I just want to show you after we get this kind of in a quadrant like this, and you select this, once it's all snapped, then we can put it on this number here and then just push it up into place. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and fix the rest of these up, and I'll come back and you can take a look. Alright, so here's what it looks like after we've got all the UVs put into the correct spot and snapped up to each one of those grid spacings that we did. The other thing that I did, let me hide this cube and I'll show you the old cube here. So I'm going to select it, hit Shift H to bring it back. Took the cube in object mode, so if you hit F8 you can switch back and forth between component mode and object mode, or you can right click and say object mode. I'm going to put it on the move tool and then hold down X and then move this thing up to make sure it's right on the floor, just like that. And we can delete history, Alt Shift D, that'll delete any history that's on this thing. And now our pivot point is up here in the air. So there's two things we could do. We could go to modify, we can freeze the transformations, and that's going to zero out all the transforms here. We could also go reset transformations after we're done doing that, and it'll set it down here in the origin. Or I can hit undo. We could tap D and we could hold down X and we could snap this thing that way to the grid and then hit D again, and that's basically moving our pivot point. So there's different ways of getting to that. So that's what I did with this cube, and let's bring this one back here. I'll select this, hit Shift H to bring it back so we can view the visibility of it. So we got this cube, we've got our nice rounded corners, we've got our UVs set up, and now it's going to be a matter of us starting to build out some of our textures. So let's go back to the UV, go to the UV editor, so you can get it from here, or you can go to Windows and go to UV editor here. So it's in two different places. So again, remember what I was saying about the 0 to 1 space? So our texture is actually going to fit within here. Basically what I did was, if we go to Photoshop and we open this up, this is eventually what we're going to build. We're going to build some textures that look like ground and grass. But before we do that, what I set up was basically this image file. And you can see if we turn on our rulers, I hit Control R. If I drag this thing out, basically what I set up for myself was this. Textures that equal out to be 16 pixels by 16 pixels. So that's what I want in this corner here. So in order to do that, if we get our trusty calculator out and we just do 16 by 3, we'll get 48. So we've got 48 pixels this way and 48 pixels this way. So to do that, just make File New like that. And we can switch this to pixels, and so we've got 48 pixels by 48 pixels, just like this. It's going to be pretty small, and we can zoom in on this. I'm going to hold down Control Alt and do the plus symbol to kind of zoom in on here. And again, Control R will turn on and off our rulers, so we can just click and drag out something here that's 16 pixels like this, and we've got 16 pixels this way like this. Now we can get a marquee tool, so we can tap M and we'll do the square or rectangle marquee, and we could drag this out with our guides. That's one way of doing it. I'm going to get rid of these guides real quick just to make sure they're not causing any problems. So I tap V like that, and I'll tap M to get back that marquee tool. We can actually tell it to be a fixed size, so we can tell it to be a width of 16 pixels by 16 pixels. Now if you see inches, you can double click on your ruler here, and you can change that from units from inches to be pixels, and then that way you can see in pixel dimensions. So what I could do is do 16 pixels by 16 pixels, and I just click and drag out, and that'll make a square for me. At that point, if I drag out my guides, it'll snap to that. And I can just move another one here. You can see it's snapping here, and then I just need to drag another one out here like that. So then this is giving us basically a marquee selection, and we could make a new group and call this you know, sections or something like that. I don't think it really matters. But then I can make a new layer, and I could fill it with a color. So I'm just going to select this right here and give it red and fill it with red. And maybe I'll call this front. And then I can just duplicate this thing, tap V, move it over, and it'll snap. And then I could fill this with a lighter version of red, like that. Tap V, I can duplicate this, and so I'll call this is front. I believe this will be left is what we laid this out. If I tap V and move this over, this should be, we've got left. I moved the wrong one. Let's put left here. Then this one here we can move over. Let's call this back, like that. Give it a lighter color. I'm hitting Alt backspace to fill with this, by the way. And let's do this. Move this one down. This one should be right, like that. And I'll fill that with a lighter color. Alt backspace. And then we need a top and a bottom. So let's call this top. And move it over. Tap V, move it over. And I'm going to fill this with a blue color. And duplicate it one more time. Tap V and move it over. And I'm going to fill it with a darker blue for the bottom, like that. And we can zoom out, Control Alt minus. And so here's our different color coded things. This is basically the process that I use for this one. I guess I actually called this maybe faces or something like that on this one. No big deal for that. And then what I did, here's what I do for saving these files. Control Shift S is going to let you save as. And then I called it maybe texturebuilder.psd. And then I like to right click, make a new folder, and make it a Targa folder. And then I'm going to save Targa versions of this. And so then I'll save it as a PSD first. And let me close this. I just wanted to show you what was the process for that. So if I do Control Shift S to save that, and saved it as this texturebuilder.psd, I save that. I'm not going to replace it. Once you have that saved, if you want to save it as a Targa, go into the Targa folder that you made, and then just change the file type to Targa, and then say Texture Builder and hit save. and you want to save that as 24-bit, like that. Hit OK. All right. And so after I created that, then it's just a matter of going into Maya, and let's push this over here. I do have this on the default material, so let's take a look at the material that I made for this. If we go to Windows, Rendering Editors, and then go to Hypershade, we can take a look at Maya's area for building materials and things like that. So I just made a blend material, so if you just take a blend and click it, it'll make this blend material that you got here, like this. And if you click on this, you can see all the properties for it, and you might want to take the color and then map it. So if you click this button that was here, it'll make a new file texture node, and then within here you can navigate to where your texture sits. So if I navigate to where my texture sits in our target folder, if we go back to this one that we made, you can see that it was going to put this in the color of our texture. And so basically I was checking to make sure that this was the front, the left, the back, and the right, and then this map to the top and the bottom with our color coding. Okay, so that was the first thing I did. And then after that was done, let me show you this real quick to make sure that our filtering type is set to off. It's normally set to, I think, bitmapping, which makes it nice and soft, but we're trying to get this kind of pixelated kind of look. So if we do that from bitmap and turn that to off, it'll make nice crisp lines there at that point. Something else about our grid, if we turn on this will turn on and off the anti-aliasing. You might want to turn that on. That just makes things look a little bit better. So let's hop back on over to Photoshop, and basically I just took this file and duplicated it over, and then I started filling in each one of these little blocks with what I was saying is grass. So I went to the front, and you can see that basically if we zoom in on this, Control Alt plus and minus, once you get to a certain spot, you'll see you're actually filling individual, like you can see the individual pixels. And if I put on my brush, let's put it on a this front here, and if I put it on brush, and you can see I can change it from brush. If I go here, I can put that on a pencil tool, and I can make that just 1 pixel or multiple pixels wide for this. So it's just a matter of going through with some colors and things like that, right, and kind of filling that out in that area, and then just doing some stuff for grass. Actually, I made the grass first and then copied some of that and then moved it. So let's see what we've got going on here. So we've got this kind of brownish tones, and then I took the grass, the top of it, and actually took the eraser tool. So you can go to the eraser tool and cut some of these out. Now with the eraser tool, what I actually changed this mode to block instead of brush. So if you put on block, you're erasing out these different like kind of pixels at that point. See how this kind of disappears like that? So I accidentally erased out some of that dirt. Okay, the other thing that I did was if I right click on here and go to blending options for this grass, I actually used a drop shadow on there. So here's some of the options that I set for this. I think I only set it to a distance of 1 pixel, and then here's some of the size. So it just puts a little bit of shading on the bottom of this grass, and basically did that for the front, left, right, and back. And then this is the top of the grass, and then we have grass on the top and then dirt on the bottom. So all this gets mapped after we save out a target file. So if I did the save as, went to the target file, this is what I call it, grass dirt color.tga, and put an underscore color. And let's hop back on over to Maya. And so it was just a matter of taking this texture that we had and then swapping it out. So let's go back to Windows, Rendering Editors, and go back to the Hypershade and load that back up. And you can see here's the texture node that I had. And I'll just swap that back out with the grass and dirt like this. And you can see here is one of our pieces. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to do is take this and export this thing out and get it into UE4. I could show you a few little things that I did. Just to test things out, I took the blocks, duplicated them, and then I just moved them over holding down X as I would drag on the grid, and I can snap to the grid like that. So I'm testing everything out, and I got this nice kind of lighting setup. So what I did for that was I just went and said create lights and went to spotlight, and then I've got a cone angle of 40, penumbula angle of 20, and if I go to show my lights, I've got that on. Let's see, where are you? Light, your spotlight. It's actually pretty small. If I wanted to make this bigger as far as the visibility of the icon, I could get that to be a little bit bigger in through there. Actually, it's not really changing. So maybe I've got this invisible. There we go. Okay, so show lights. And now I can see what this thing kind of looks like. Let me go ahead and select it as an object. And I was just seeing if we could see what this this cone angle and this penumbula angle look like. So within here, if I took the cone angle is 40, and that's kind of like how far it kind of comes out in this kind of cone direction. If I put this down to like 20, you can see it gets kind of tighter with this. And if I did, let's say 20 and the penumbula angle 0, you can see this is the shape of the spotlight. And if I do this penumbula angle, this is kind of like the fall off of it. So I want that to be kind of high, about 20 or so. And I think that looks pretty cool. Maybe I can put this up to maybe 30, something like that. And you'll notice, like, when I created the spotlight, I had cast shadows turned on. If you don't have that, no big deal. I can select it, hit Control A to bring up the attribute editor. And let's take a look at this thing here. So we're going to turn on shadows. We'll go to shadows, say use depth map shadows, and here's a resolution of 2048. And if I want the textures to be kind of soft, I do this filter size. You can see if it's on 0, it's like really crisp in here. If I pull that up to 5, it'll get softer at that point. And if I want the shadows to be any softer than that, I have to, seems weird, I have to drop down the resolution of this, and it doesn't look all that great. So I think a number of 2048 will look pretty decent on there for that. The other thing you need to do is go under lighting and make sure shadows are turned on, and you got two-sided lighting. And we've got this, if we tap 4, this is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is textured, and then 7 is shaded with texturing and lighting turned on. The other thing I did is I made point lights, and I gave it a low color, like this kind of gray kind of color. So like here's one point light, and I'm kind of filling with this. If I take these and I hide them, you can see what it was doing before. It was pretty dark back there. So if I bring these back, I just made 2 lights that were, you know, their intensity is not very high. So this color is like a darker kind of gray, and then just pushed one over here, and then one kind of down and through here a little bit. Let me turn the grid off so you can see that a little bit better. And if I hit Alt B, we can cycle those colors again. So you can see what this looks like against a black background, or even our kind of gradient thing that we've got going on here. So that's kind of what I did with the cubes to set this up in Maya to kind of check it. So I'll select those and hit Control H to hide them. And basically, if we take this and we're going to export this thing out, we'll say File, Export Selection. Make sure we've got our FBX file type here. We can go and take a look at the preferences for this. So make sure smoothing groups is on, tangents and binormal, smooth mesh, and this here. We don't need any animation, so that's turned off. So we'll go ahead and close this. Now, if you do have materials and textures on here, you can go to the embed media and you can turn that on, and it'll actually save it with the FBX. We don't need to do that. We can pull that in individually later. So I'll turn that off. I'll just go ahead and close that and say export selection. And then this is where I'm going to save this out, and I will go ahead and make an FBX folder. So I'll just make a new folder and call that FBX, and maybe call this MineCraft block, do an underscore there, and we'll do this as a 10 by 10 by 10. So I'll export this thing out, and let's load up UE4 and we'll start taking a look at putting this in UE4.